in 2022. Now let's send things over to Brendan, who got the chance to catch up with Eric Rittenmeyer earlier this week.
Well, prior to the holidays, we discussed some of the emotional challenges that many deal with during that season. And certainly with a new year comes even more challenges and obstacles we all need to get through. But fear not, here to help us navigate through some of them is the emotional Marine himself, mental toughness expert and author, Eric Rittenmeyer. Hello again, Eric.
Brandon, good to see you, my man. Happy New Year. I'm so glad to be back.
Same to you, sir. Great to have you back on the Rhode Show for a second time here. Let's get right to it here. You know, emotional intelligence is something that is fascinating to me. You know, it's an area that I think many of us might even struggle with, especially if we don't know exactly what it is, because we're all dealing with emotions as we go through every single day of our lives. So right off the bat here, before we get into your new book and all that stuff, what exactly is emotional intelligence?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Brandon, because there's so many misconceptions about mental toughness and emotional intelligence. When you hear these terms, you automatically think of, like, you know, push-ups and jumping jacks and things like that. Emotional intelligence, mental toughness, I use it interchangeably. It's all about emotional control. Emotional intelligence is self-awareness, self-regulation. It's not trying to turn off emotions. It's just learning to acknowledge them and control them. We have no training on this. We get none of this in school. So it's this topic. It's a soft skill, which is why I think a lot of people don't put a bunch of emphasis on it. It's kind of like pie in the sky, hairy fairy, unicorns and Skittles, but it's very, very real. We're emotional creatures. We just get no training on how to control it.
Especially as we go about, like I said, our day-to-day lives, we're kind of just not necessarily forced, but we're put in these situations where emotions play a big role. So it's really important that we become aware of them. So let's get into some of the challenges that people may face that you're really great at breaking down. First of all, for so many of us, it's very difficult to articulate actually how we feel. So how do we kind of navigate through that one?
Yeah, it starts off with acknowledging the feeling. And here's the problem. We're taught, as children, we're taught, especially as men, as boys, right? We're taught to turn it off. You can't feel that way, Brendan. You can't cry. You're a boy. Boys don't cry, right? Turn off the emotion. It's impossible. We are animals. We're hardwired to feel first and think later. We have an emotional reaction to every single thing that we communicate to others. So instead of trying to turn it off, we have to learn to acknowledge it. Once we acknowledge it, then we learn how to process it. So in our minds, we have to realize that 100% of the emotions we feel are okay. It's okay if we're angry. It's okay if we're sad. It's okay if we're happy. It's how we control and it's how we acknowledge and it's how we express those that's important. Everything we feel is okay. It's how we respond to them that's important.
Absolutely. And so many of us, moving on to the next one, feel like we are alone, especially not just physically in the, you know, the real world or whatever, but within our mind. I mean, it's like, I'm alone here. How do I get through this? So that feeling of being alone in your mind, can you speak a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, we're a society that's ashamed of emotion, right? I mean, we just can't express it. And again, especially for men, it's like, turn it off, bro. Like, you can't do that. So we're just raised, we're in the society of being a sign of weakness, as opposed to learning these coping mechanisms and these skills where we're able to better express it. So it's like that old saying that, you know, your parents, you're a lot younger than me, but my parents used to say, don't hold in your sneeze because your lungs are going to collapse if you hold it in, right? It's the same thing with emotions. We bottle it up. We go through life. We just constantly suppress it. And then something happens. We have this triggering event that sets us off. And as kids, we're not taught skills. So what do? We handle those the way we know how to handle it, by anger, by aggression, by yelling, by screaming, by ruining relationships, as opposing to find a way to process it, acknowledge it, and then respond to it as opposed to react.
That's true. I'm actually only 17. This TV show I have is a secret project.
Exactly right. You look good for your age. You have wonderful hair, too. Awesome hair.
I'm trying, buddy. Let's move on here to the next one. You know, the fear of being weak. And these are certainly, you and I can have some fun here, but these are so serious. I mean, because so many of us, we have this preconceived notion, like you said, that everyone's going to think I'm weak if I'm going through this.
And this goes back to the Marine Corps stuff, too. And I goof off. I'm silly all the time. I got to be serious here for a minute. You know, I talk a lot about, I do a lot of segments on veteran suicide, unfortunately. And this is one of the problems that we have, you know, in the Marine Corps especially, but in the military in general, we have a phrase. It's improvise, adapt, and overcome. So when we come across a hurdle, when we come across a speed bump, some sort of adversity, we improvise, we adapt, we overcome. There's a mission. It has to be completed. Failure is not an option. What I think happens with a lot of veterans, especially, is they try to apply that towards mental issues, mental problems they're having, and it doesn't apply. So when they face something that's a hurdle mentally, they try to apply the improvise, adapt, and overcome. It doesn't work. So what do they know? Failure's not an option. That's where suicide comes into play, which is why we see such a high, one of the reasons, not the only reason, one of the main reasons why we see such a high level of suicides for veterans is because they view it as a sign of weakness and a sign of failure, which it's not. That's what we have to get away from. Our emotions are okay. You're not weak because you feel them. We just have to show you ways to express it. That's all it is.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, we are all only human, which is a beautiful thing, of course. And lastly here, too many feelings to separate them. I think a lot of us feel this tidal wave of feelings. How do we kind of sort through them?
I'm going to give you the biggest word I know, Brendan. Don't ask me how to spell it. It's the biggest word in my language. Compartmentalization. So part of emotional intelligence and mental toughness is the ability to compartmentalize our emotions. What's that mean? It means we're able to take our feelings and put them in a box and set them on a shelf and not allow them to bleed over into other things. What ends up happening is we get into this cycle of when it rains, it pours, right? So we have a feeling that has something to do with work. That feeling now bleeds over into our personal life. So something that happens at home by itself might not have been that big of a deal, but when it gets layered on top of something that happened at work, now it's the end of the world. So we compartmentalize our emotions. We're able to separate them and say, okay, this is where I am at work. This is where I'm at home. This is why I feel the way I feel, but it's acknowledging it. It's in learning ways to acknowledge it. We have to stop trying to ignore the fact that we're emotional creatures. It's impossible. We can't do it. We're going to feel every minute of every day.
Absolutely. And quickly here, Eric, before we wrap up, you've got a great ebook, Maximize Your Emotional Intelligence, which is available now for download, correct?
It is, and it's free to all your viewers. Thank you so much for that, Brendan. Yes, it's on my website, mentaltoughnessspeaker.com. It's a free ebook, Maximize Your Emotional Intelligence. Just a very simple read. I'm a former Marine. I can hardly read or write, okay? So trust me, it's an easy read.
I'm going to download it, and I'll have my book report to you by St. Patrick's Day. How does that sound?
Ish, right? Throw ish in there.
Eric, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Likewise, Brendan. It's awesome seeing you, brother. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. If you guys would like even more information, you can find it all. We'll have links to Eric's website at ours, rhodeshow.com.